Good morning to everyone joining us once again for our weekly broadcast. It's Thursday, 10 a.m. Once again, and good morning to my co-host, Mr. John Corey.
Good day, David. How are you?
I'm excellent today, absolutely fantastic. Looking forward to today. Today is going to be a little bit of exciting information on some things that have happened in the last week or so, and another interesting topic of discussion and education. And just looking at some of the attendees in this morning, there's at least one person I can see on here this morning, John, that can help us out probably with the topic that we're going to be discussing.
So I also see there's dot on today. So
that could be the first name and second name. That's right. But we'll come on to that in a minute. So yeah, I think all the attendees know myself, David Johnson, the CEO and founder of Leo Crowdfunding, equity property crowdfunding platform, and I'll let my co-host introduce himself.
John Corey. Introduction is interesting because someone was asking what do I do, and I guess what I say these days is I'm a landlord that came out of the tech sector, but at the same time I like to point out that I'm more of an angel investor for what my current activity is, and that I'm happy to let someone else drive. I'm enjoying being in the back of the bus, so to speak, and let the others get on with it, and I'll sort of send money.
Yeah, and you're also the the owner stroke organizer of Property Fortress, so you do monthly online meets, etc.
That I am, yeah. Well, it's we pivoted to online, as many did, and started the meeting about 15 years ago when I moved back down from Chester to London. I've always found in the property sector, one of the best ways to grow is to talk to other property investors. And in the sense, that's what we're doing right here. And we definitely encourage people to raise questions or get in touch if that's what they want to do. But definitely, if you have any questions, post them in the Q&A today as we go through today's topic.
Yeah, and definitely today is going to be a topic where we can invite people to perhaps even help us. If there's a part of the topic that we don't have all the latest information on, you can definitely contribute by putting your comments into the Q&A.
We can always use help.
We can always use help, particularly, definitely. We're by no means the fount of all knowledge when it comes to property. You're maybe close, John, in the market, but there's still gaps of information that we all have.
It's a relative game, yes.
Very much so, very much so. So okay, property market then. So leading into today's topic, actually, this caught my attention, which is why we chose today's topic. London is the epicenter of the housing crisis. And I was just staggered by this figure, and I mean I knew it was a big figure, but I never sort of saw it written down in this way recently. So 250,000 people on waiting lists for council housing, and then the second one, John, really caught my attention: 165,000 homeless living in temporary accommodation arranged by their local borough council. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of people. I know London's a big city, but that's still a lot of people, and that's obviously just London. I don't have the stats for the rest of England, but this is a crisis.
What was the first number? 265 or something?
250,000 are waiting lists for council accommodation.
So if there are 10 million people in London, that's a small number.
Mm-hmm.
And
it's a small number.
What I don't understand is, how do you get on a waiting list? Do you just put your name in? I don't think it's quite that simple. I would have expected that this means something specific. And clearly, if there's someone in the audience that knows, it'd be great to pop something into the Q&A. But 250 people on a waiting list. So I'm living somewhere and I want to get a different place. Is that what that means? I don't have anywhere to live and I want to get a place. That's it. So I don't know what a waiting list for council housing means.
Yeah, well, in Northern Ireland, there would be like a point system. So you have to obviously have some type of a need, some type of a requirement to be eligible to be on the list. So not anyone can just walk in and put their name on the list. And obviously there's like a point scoring system that would determine where you are on the list. And then within that, you've got your priority and different things. And I know England, Scotland, and Wales is different than Northern Ireland, but certainly as a total of the whole population, yes, I get what you're saying, but in real terms, in people's lives, like that's 250,000 people are sort of waiting. Their lives are on hold as they wait
Well,
for
I
their
don't
next
see. I don't think they
house.
are. That I think it's very unsettling, and maybe the 165 numbers may be more of a problem
Yeah,
because they're in temporary accommodation, which is definitely probably unsettling more. And I don't understand the 250 where they're living now, but I do understand in the 165 they're in temporary accommodation, and that is truly temporary. So at the same time, it's not like they're without a home. It's without, in the sense of nowhere to stay, but it could be a very uncomfortable, aggressive, noisy, unsuitable, cramped location. It's sort of like you're in transit. You haven't arrived.
Yeah. That's exactly what I was going to use. Was your life is in transition of in some way. It's not that you may not be in property now, but you're looking to change, and therefore your life is in transit. So,
Well, I could definitely see the homeless. Now, what's interesting, that means someone is providing accommodation for 165,000 people. So someone, some entity, whether it's council loan, whether it's individual loan, rented by the council, but 165 people are living somewhere that someone else is providing on a temporary basis, versus the 250 on the wait list. I don't know quite, where are they in the meantime? Are they part of the 165 or so?
Yeah, no, there's some clarity around that. So one of our attendees, one of our regular attendees, has put up here, each London council has its own criteria for its waiting list. So that's a little bit similar to what I was saying there. There is a criteria to get on the waiting list, and then where you are in the pecking order. Homelessness is a statutory definition. Okay, so that adds some clarity around the 165,000 in London. Someone else has said here, I assume it's those eligible for affordable housing. That's a guess, though. I take it with a pinch of salt. So yeah, so again, that eligibility comes into play in terms of the point system. Any other ones come in there, John, that you can see you want to comment on?
Well, one, coming back to the point about statutory definition. So therefore, there's a statute, there's a rule defining it. And anecdotally, before 1919, councils had no requirement to house people. It's sort of a side effect to the end of World War I. It's maybe a sign of a modern sympathetic society that understands that the health and well-being of all the citizens matter. This idea that it's a statutory definition is useful, and yet the waiting list is sort of fluctuates what it means for each council. So to tackle these problems sometimes is a challenge to understand, well, what are we tackling? But let's roll forward unless there are other questions.
Yeah, let's get into it. So the last comment before we move on to the next sort of part of this morning. Yeah, just some anecdotal evidence. Someone said they've noticed more rough sleepers around where they live, and that's in Bexley, close to Kent. So maybe just an indication that there is perhaps a crisis that is developing or increasing in this region. And yeah, so the question then that was going to be put to you then was, what are the biggest factors or drawbacks that prevent those who are socially or economically vulnerable from being able to find suitable accommodation? So what are the factors that feed this crisis?
So that's an interesting question in looking at some of the responses from people. One is you have too many children in the accommodation that you're living in for it not being suitable. That might mean you have a boy and a girl and you only have one bedroom for the children. It could be you're disabled, you have a medical condition. So not NHS, but more the Department of Health type issues where you're somehow associated with a longer term condition and therefore appropriate housing matters. Now, there's social, economic, if you were born a certain way or you served in the military and were injured and all these other things, these are very easy to sort of see or point to. When it comes to socially or economically vulnerable, well, it's hard for me to get my head around where the line is. I think it's more of a big gray line than a small, black, easy to see line. And what does economically vulnerable mean? Does it mean you didn't develop any skills in school and now you don't have any opportunities or fewer opportunities? Or does it mean that you're a recent immigrant? Or does it mean that you're suffering in some other way that was external, in the sense that you don't have ownership of? There's a lot of people who can be vulnerable for lots of reasons, and how many of those affect their ability to find suitable accommodation? Maybe they're immune, they have immune deficiency so that they don't have the ability to go view properties easily because of COVID. We're seeing in the news today, there's an issue with prostate cancer. 14,000 people that they think should have shown up in the system for having prostate cancer, but haven't shown up yet. So does that mean people aren't putting their hand up and getting tested because of COVID? So there's a lot of factors at work, which makes these problems hard, but it doesn't mean they're impossible. It just complicates it. Yeah,
and there is a wider discussion in terms of society about poverty and what is the poverty line, and there are obviously different views on that in terms of where that should be. I mean, I don't think anyone would disagree that a government and a society should look after the most vulnerable. I mean, that should be a given. However, when you get near that line of what is the poverty line and who defines it, coming from a buy-to-let landlord background, no question, there is a large degree of frustration when the tenant hasn't paid you the rent on time because they say they can't afford it, but they've got the latest TV and the latest sofa, and wearing all the latest brand clothes.
Maybe
but they're defined as being in poverty.
Yeah, and let's leave out maybe the people who have the latest, and let's just say they legitimately don't have the money and they haven't been spending it on other things that are questionable. The idea that the landlord should become the bank is probably not useful, because many landlords may struggle if that goes on for very long. And then the other side of that is, well, should the state always have to step in? Because in effect, the state is not this infinite money pit. If the state's stepping in, that means someone going to work, their taxes are paying. So as I said once when I was running localism, the idea that people who grew up in the local community should be able to stay in the local community when they're on benefits, it's nice, but what it's sort of saying is those that are actually able to hold a job and pay taxes are the ones who have to commute. They're not the ones that are able to live local. So how do you balance the needs of all the different sides? And some are more capable, some have more assets, some have more ability, or they got lucky in the lottery or whatever, lottery of life. But how do you apportion support, and how do you have an efficient system for getting this done? So these things are definitely a challenge. When you said most vulnerable, well, do we eliminate those that aren't most? They're vulnerable, but they're not most vulnerable?
Yeah, that's the discussion. How do you define vulnerable? Exactly the discussion. So no, very, very, very interesting. So today we are going to do a very high level kind of peel back on accommodation types. And these are terms, John, not by any means an exhaustive list, but probably three main terms that are bandied about in conversations. And we thought we would just maybe explain them briefly, like a bit about housing. We're getting more and more fundraisers coming to us, particularly motivated by wanting to give back, to society, wanting to provide accommodation for the more vulnerable in society, those that maybe have needs. And I'm detecting, as part of the changing in particularly our commercial areas, more of a drive to turning those commercial areas into accommodation that actually helps the crisis there is in this area. So in terms of social, affordable, and emergency, any sort of high level sort of comments on those?
Well, I'd rather not comment. If you have specific definitions, let's put those out there, that we can sort of build from that.
Yeah, so in terms of social housing, they're usually broken down into council managed housing. You've got residential management organization properties, sheltered housing, housing associations would all come into that catch-all term of social housing. That's quite quite a broad spectrum. And again,
Exactly.
happy if any of our attendees want to add any further, or perhaps experts in social housing. By all means, you can add a comment in there. But that's the breadth of it, John. It's quite a large chunk and covers quite a few different types.
So is social emergency housing has at least the connotation that it's an event, it's shorter term, it's something you respond to quickly, and you sort out later the bigger, longer term issues. Affordable says to me that you might have a job, you might not have a job, you might have a job, but only part-time or whatever. And it's your ability to generate an income versus your ability to provide housing for your family, whatever that may mean. Could be a single mom, could be a family of 5 kids and 2 working parents. It could be an elderly person, but it means different things, but it generally assumes that the person has some sort of ability to earn an income. They may be on 100% benefits, and affordable might include disabled people. I don't know that we treat affordable housing for the disabled quite the same. I suspect that it's slightly different again. Particularly like adults with learning disabilities that are on full state support. I don't know that falls into the affordable category, and it's certainly not an emergency. So then there's this idea of social. Well, so what did you say the definition of social was?
Yeah, I don't have that as a sentence. I just wanted to ask what do attendees what do they feel the definition of social housing? What's encapsulated by that? And let's get some feedback from the attendees on that.
And while we're waiting for a couple of people to answer, there was a question. I said something about localism. So under the coalition government, there was this idea that they wanted to pilot something called localism, and it meant that in the planning realm, that you would have the national framework, you'd have the local council plans, you then maybe have another layer down, and the local community could put forward a formal plan. Now, this was a junior to the other layers. The local community couldn't suddenly say, we want to ban skyscrapers in central London, we want to make, eliminate all roads. There was superior planning rules and regulations, but localism could then create a local flavor, a local nuance. And I ran one of the pilot groups, one of the vanguard groups under the localism plan. It was the only urban one. So that addresses the question about localism.
Yeah, okay. In terms of social housing, my sort of broad definition is just it's the type of housing that are provided to help those who have social challenges or challenges within society. So it's a catch-all phrase in some ways.
That's what I'm worried about. So I'm not sure it's as useful on here now. One of the people wrote that there is a definition for affordable rent, which means 80% of the market rent. So whatever the market rent is, 80% of that. So social seems to be historically used to refer to council provided or council subsidized or something of that nature, but it seems to be this vague, amorphous blanket that you throw over a lot of things. It could mean it's where the retired sailors live. The idea, is it social? It's where the parties happen. I don't know if this has a technical definition as much as the others do, and then there's social as any housing related to the other categories.
Well, the good thing is we plan to bring on sort of experts in this field over the next number of weeks, so it'll be really good to dive into these in more detail. It was good today just kind of to raise them, and I see one of our attendees has actually said, well done, Leo, for discussing the homeless situation. So thank you for that feedback. You've referred to
it's definitely a problem, and it's definitely an opportunity. I'll give you an example. When I was running this localism group, one person said, he was on a tenant management organization, a very large one. So his credentials would be along the lines of representing tenants. And he said, we want more housing for people who work locally. And I said, what does that mean? He said, well, people that have jobs and, trying to get to work. It'd be good if they could live locally. And I said, yeah, but if we use that definition of our goal, that means I should move out everybody in council housing to get those people out of here because they don't work locally. They don't need to be local. So that's not what you're trying to say. But when we get into these simple definitions, it becomes quite awkward very quickly.
And that's a good point. And perhaps that complexity is one of the reasons why it's a more difficult crisis stroke challenge to solve. One of our attendees has put on here, again, this is what I was referring to earlier, because I know they actually work in a council environment in London. Housing associations tend to work to affordable rents, and council rents are generally lower than affordable, but it's not about the type of housing. Okay, so thank you for that. So they're kind of the three ones that would get talked about: social, affordable. We haven't talked about emergency, and there's just an extra slide on that. Okay. Which is probably the one that's now becoming probably the hottest part of that sector. And that is where councils are wanting to provide emergency housing, or again, I'm not even sure if there's a legal requirement for them to do it. Well,
the interesting one on that is during the crisis with Afghanistan, a number of people were brought out of Afghanistan. And the central government was facilitating that airlift. And they then turned to the councils and said, how many can you take? And I don't know whether there's a legal obligation for them to say anything more than 0, but there was definitely, we have to ring around to the councils. We have to find out what they can accommodate. We have to work with them on this. And in the meantime, we're going to stick these people in hotels. We're trying to get them permanent housing. So I guess you'd say it's emergency housing, then it goes to permanent housing. But this whole idea of emergency housing that converts into longer term, and how do you distribute that across the country? So
yeah. So the second one there, the immigration conditions, would be what you're referring to there. So you've got those that are legally homeless. You have those that are fall under the immigration conditions, and that can fluctuate depending on not just what's happening in the UK, but as you mentioned, the example of Afghanistan, world events can contribute to that and to the pressure that comes on local councils. And then I suppose the biggest or the widest definition is the priority needs, sort of factors with children, pregnancy, domestic abuse is unfortunately sort of increasing. And this whole area around vulnerability and risk means that there is a requirement for emergency housing. Normally it might be a day or two sometimes in houses. These tend not to be like months in the same place necessarily. So the councils tend to rent these on a nightly basis. But yeah, so again, this is an area we're gonna maybe focus on over the next couple of weeks as well. So just to wrap this up then, any further comments here? There's one. One of the disincentives I see is a disconnect in the supply chain for private housing being used for social. Mortgage lenders, insurance providers, even utility providers charge higher rates for their products and services on the basis of their customer using a property for social housing, disallowing landlords from discriminating against tenants on the benefits doesn't seem to have been extended to those providers. Yeah, okay, interesting. Yeah. Some good thoughts there.
I know that you want to have a person on who wants to raise money to provide some more social housing, and that might be a really good question for them, which is, how are you going to raise all the money you need? Some of it might be from the crowd, but are you going to be able to get a landlord? And then if the utility companies don't want to provide service on a credit basis, then how do you manage that? So there's a whole set of questions that cascade out.
Yeah, I'm just noticing too here in the chat box. I'll just refer to them quickly before we move on then, because we're always glad when attendees take the time to contribute. It's a point scoring system in England as well. It's also referring back to what I had said about Northern Ireland. If you have children and not enough rooms, which as you said, John, it's so many points. And then the other point scoring that we talked about. 250,000 is made up of people who are renting privately or sharing with their parents, but want to get a council property due to just long-term availability and usually cheaper rents. That's something we hadn't mentioned so far, cheaper rents, which is interesting.
Well, they're cheaper because someone else is paying.
Yes, well, cheaper to the user. Yeah.
Yes.
Which is the tenant.
And if you're going to give me the keys to a Ferrari, it's cheaper then I have to buy it, but it doesn't mean it doesn't cost. So, and that's why we then get into this point system and prioritization and who's more vulnerable, which then says, well, if you don't have children or you don't have this problem or you don't have this history, then you're lower down the list. So you're not going to progress up the list because people that have a higher priority are going to keep coming in front of you, which is fair, but very unsettling for the person. They're going to have to eventually say, look, I'm stuck. I'll never get off this list. So I need to find a different way to solve this problem.
Yeah. There's another really good comment in here, but we're going to have to just move on from time point of view. But there's one in the chat box there, sort of getting into how local MPs obviously dealing with complaints and sort of through COVID and things like that. So yeah, really interesting topic. I think one that it's showing that this is very relevant because really good engagement there. So we will come back to these over the next few weeks. So just to wrap up then the last few minutes, delighted to announce our second project has paid back successfully. So again, a really big coup for the platform. This was the Plough Hill View project we mentioned a few weeks ago. It was projected to be 25% over 12 months. It did take longer than expected, but there was a ratchet in play, and therefore the payback to the investors was 30% ROI on their initial investment to purchase the shares in the SPV. So John, I know you're obviously familiar with this one. Brilliant that the investors have received their money back in another completed project.
Well, okay, so a few things. First of all, this is a client that I work for, so Curation Tech and Hitesh. Second is I was an investor in this, and I say was because obviously we got paid back, and therefore our shares have been purchased back. I think it's amazing just because this was dead center during COVID. Supply chain management issues, staff issues, masking up, work from home, can't work from home on a building site, got to work close together at some level on a building site. So this was, I was happy to be the passive investor rather than the person running around trying to deal with the latest crisis every day. And I haven't been to the properties, but they do look amazing. Very stylish if you enjoy a sort of a wood finish. And there's obviously some recordings, I think, on the website about a walkthrough. You can get to see what they look like. There's a 4-bedroom detached house you can see in the image, and then the others, I think, are 3 bedrooms plus loft room or bedroom in the loft room, so 4 bedrooms. And yeah, there was some definite challenges for the developer, but as I said, I'm enjoying being the back of the bus, letting someone else do the driving. So.
What are the benefits of using equity property crowdfunding? Also fantastic to announce that the Becontree Avenue project that we had on there successfully closed at 161% above minimum target. So 39 investors, 161,200 have made their pledges. We're now moved to the shareholder agreement, which will probably be out with the investors maybe Monday, Tuesday. And they'll have a chance to look at that before deciding to accept finally. But again, John, this was a different type of project. This was an income type project. There's some nuances compared to an ordinary development projects, but again, it was good to see an appetite. People who understood that while the ROI at 12% wasn't as high as development, they understood the value of having quarterly sort of rents coming in or share of rent, and thereby having an income.
Well, I think we're maybe over analyzing this. This is simply buy and hold. Now, I as an investor, or if I invest in this, that's because the shareholders aren't done. It's not clear who will invest. But if an investor moves forward on this, essentially, you're getting income from a property that is rented. That sounds like standard buy to let. But you haven't had to arrange the mortgage, you haven't had to put down the deposit, you don't have to take the phone calls, you don't have to deal with the management or anything else. So it's a passive investment, but it's a buy and hold. And most of the return, because it's short term, this is only a 2-year, I think, project. It's 2-year investment in the income that will be generated from the rents over the 2 years. Simple as that. It's not really about it's definitely not about development. It's not really about capital appreciation. It's about the share of the income stream. Funny enough, it seems odd that we talk about this way in the platform, but that's what most property investors do. They buy and hold. So this is actually the mainstream in the market. This is the fat part of the wedge, okay, not the thin part called development. So this is the normal stuff, even though it's not normal on the platform.
That's a very good point, actually. Very good point on that. We are about to, very, very close to having the Aldwick road from Target 5 go view deal. So obviously we'll keep everyone informed when that does. It's a mixed use HMO conversion down in Bognor, Regis, a sort of a purchase, refurb, and add value and sell. So it is very close to being launched. And then, John, we indicated last week that we have set the date for our next Fundraiser Live Bootcamp. We had a really, really brilliant event in December with 15 developers stroke fundraisers, obviously who paid to spend 3 days with us, 3 intense days. And we're doing this again then 15th, 16th, 17th of March. The URL is on the screen there. You can grab it. But I think we really enjoyed the last one, John, and people really, the feedback was excellent in terms of value.
Oh, people had very seriously thought it was good value. They were fully engaged for 3 days. This is truly a workshop. It's not just fire hosing you with a bunch of stuff. And it's so that people can get their heads around what they need to do to raise money for their deals. It will be 3 days, a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. It is like a 10 to 7, 10 to 6 type time frame. We did tend to end slightly early each day, so 10 to 6 is probably fair if you're trying to sort your schedules. But again, the 15th through the 17th of March, it is live, it is on camera, it's back and forth dialogue. This is not something you press record, go away and run your normal day. So if you're interested in that, use the URL that David's sharing, but expect that it'll be full on.
And it was really interactive, and that was one of the big benefits. We had some very, very experienced developers who brought a lot of their own experience and stories to the table, which I think really helped, the whole group, as well as us obviously covering very important information regarding structuring deals, regarding compliance, regulation, brand building, all those things that are very relevant. And again, we had some guest speakers along and things like that. So yeah, so for anyone, who's this for? Dead simple, anyone who's wanting to raise funds going forward for property projects, this really is a must if you're wanting to source funds from outside yourself effectively. So if you're looking to source funds from any third party, then you really need to understand everything that is contained in that. And this course, sort of 3-day workshop, is absolutely ideal. So there it is on the screen, the URL. You can go there and book from there. Next week, we are delighted to have Alex Impey back. Again, sort of keeping with this theme of, I think what it is, John, there's just been a lot of people talking about, given the changes in the commercial world, particularly, and buildings becoming available. A lot of people have a social conscience, if you like, about how do we bring those two things together, i.e. some of the vacant buildings, vacant commercial premises. How do we then help social housing and affordable housing and emergency housing? How do we help solve the problem for society? And a lot of companies now are pivoting towards that type of a model. Alex is again got a real lot of experience in this whole field and is developing this whole co-living, live, work, play sort of model. And I'm looking forward to having them next week, John.
Yeah, I mean, this is a little less about social housing, the way we talked earlier with that big umbrella, and more about the integrated lifestyle of live, work, play, private rental sector, people that they're more interested in their quality of life than they are in having a detached house in the country. It's more about downstairs is work, there's social areas to hang out with people, there's the ability to have your own space, and that sort of fluidity of life that we see going on these days.
Yeah, so really looking forward to it, to hear what he's up to and have a good discussion on that. So that's next week. Alex Impey will join us, and we'll have a conversation around the future of co-living, which is great. So of course, this will be on our YouTube channel within about next half hour. So you'll be able to go back in and listen to some of the comments that were made around the topic we discussed today. So that remains nothing more today than to thank everyone for joining us. I think by the interaction, John, this whole conversation around social housing, affordable housing, etc., is one that people like to engage in. It's relevant to people, and yeah, I think it's something that we should sort of deep dive into a bit more over the next number of months.
We will. I'm sure we will.
So thanks everyone, and have a fantastic rest of the day. And we look forward to seeing you again next Thursday. All the best. Bye-bye now.
Bye.
Bye-bye.